One. Go. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the RotoPros Pre-Lock MLB Show for the Wednesday 2/10 main slate. Today's slate consists of 4 games. Nothing too intense. It looks pretty straightforward. There are no real weather concerns at the moment. We just have some gusts blowing out, across the field in Chicago at 15 miles per hour. And outside of that, it looks, pretty straightforward everywhere else. So let's start at pitcher. At pitcher, we have 2 very expensive guys, in Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. And then it gets a bit, shaky after that. What are your takes at pitcher at the moment, Matt?
I think hitting is more straightforward than pitching. It's going to be a little bit challenging to figure out who to use pitching-wise on this slate, at least until we get lineups from the Nationals and the Giants game. We still don't have those batting orders yet. We do have lineups from all the other games. There are only 8 pitchers, but I think most of them are worth considering. The only pitchers that I have zero interest in are Tyson Ross pitching at the Rockies, even though he was really good last start and actually has been pretty good this year. Regardless of whether or not you buy that, it's really tough pitching at Coors. And then the other pitchers I definitely don't want to use are Felix Hernandez and James Shields. But the other 5 pitchers are all at least semi-interesting. Scherzer versus Verlander at the top. I lean Scherzer right now. He's probably just a little bit better than Verlander. He's been a little bit better strikeout-wise, a little bit less walks. But it's an easier matchup, and I think the biggest reason is just the park. So Houston has the roof open today. That's going to make it a little bit more of a hitter's park. Still on the pitcher's side, but less so than normal. San Francisco is the best pitcher's park in baseball, so even though Scherzer's on the road and Verlander's at home, the park factor favors Scherzer. The opposing offense favors Scherzer. The Giants' offense is not the easiest matchup in the world, at least not until we get their lineup. But the Angels' offense is very good, and Verlander should have a reasonably tough time against them. So easier matchup for Scherzer, and I think it's more than enough to offset the $900 price difference.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on Max versus Justin. Everything you said, checks off in my department as well. I think it's very worth it to pay the extra $1,000 even on 4-game slate for Max Scherzer. It doesn't really, affect your lineups that much when stacking bats outside of Coors because you can't really fit the Coors guys with one of the expensive aces. So in a vacuum, Max Scherzer is a much better play, I think.
Yeah, the pitchers that I like the most, though, well, it's kind of neither of those guys. It's going to be probably John Gray and Jeff Samardzija. I think the most sensible strategy is going into the mid-tier. I looked at Tropiano a decent amount before, but his numbers just aren't that good. Like, the strikeout rate from last year doesn't seem that sustainable. I'm just pulling up. I think the swinging strike rate was kind of low and didn't really fully support it. 12.5% actually last year, but it was only 13 starts. His Steamer and Zips projections don't have him for a strikeout per inning this year. Maybe he's like an 8K per 9 pitcher, which is good, and he's 4.9K on DraftKings. I think there is some value there, but it's a really hard matchup in Houston, and like I said, the roof's going to be open today. So I'd rather just use John Gray and Jeff Samardzija. They're not that much more expensive than Tropiano. I guess in terms of lineup building, you can probably put whatever hitters you want if you use 2 pitchers that are 7,500 and 6,600. Gray is at Coors, but John Gray is just really good, and he's priced down enough against the Padres that he is probably still worth strongly considering. Eric Hosmer's out of the lineup today. So this is a fairly weaker than usual Padres lineup. Samardzija, I really don't get Jeff Samardzija. He wasn't very good in his debut last time out. He had 4 strikeouts and 4 walks in 5 innings. Didn't actually give up a run, but his velocity was down a little bit. That start was at the Angels, and it was his first start of the year. So I think he should be better in a home game against the Nationals, who don't have Anthony Rendon. So I'm having a hard time deciding between Gray and Samardzija, but do you think it makes sense to go the route where you just use both of them?
Yeah, I think, for the majority of my lineups, that does make the most sense because the Rockies do have the, highest output by quite, significant amount. Well, not quite a significant amount based off Vegas, but, going against Tyson Ross at home compared to James Shields in Chicago. I mean, both pitchers are about the same caliber. Shields may be a little bit worse, but the home field advantage for the Rockies makes them, far and away the highest team that have the highest expected output. So it makes sense to, use them more per se than the Mariners offense, who could score as much runs as Rockies, but it's probably not as likely. Although
Well,
Scherzer and Justin Verlander are probably more likely to score more points than either Jeff Samardzija or John Gray.
yeah, it's kind of tough to figure out how to construct lineups around these two spots, though, because the Mariners are so much cheaper than the Rockies that you don't really need to worry about salary savings at pitcher if you use the Mariners. Like a Samardzija Scherzer Mariners stack works just fine. You could go with Samardzija and Gray and just use Mariners with the expensive Rockies plugs, and I think that's what I'm looking to do today because the Rockies offense just is bad, and they really don't have that many good hitters. So David Dahl, I think, is a mediocre hitter. Trevor Story against righties. Don't really ever have interest in Trevor Story against righties. His WRC plus, his splits, it's something like 90 points higher against lefties. I think the number, I don't have it in front of me, but just estimating 165 or so against lefties, WRC plus last year, and he's like 75 against righties. So Story's not even a good hitter against right-handed pitching. And then we have Ian Desmond, who's just awful, Ryan McMahon and Tony Walters. I guess those guys are worth considering just because of how cheap they are. But I'd rather use Mariners hitters. So for me, it's really just Mariners stacks with Blackmon and Arenado. And I mean, LeMahieu's okay. But Robinson Cano is a lot cheaper, and he's facing James Shields in a game with the wind blowing out to right field. So I think my favorite team is definitely the Mariners, but the way to get a lot of Rockies exposure is just throw Arenado and Blackmon into a lot of lineups, especially Blackmon, because just the way the positions work for Seattle. Well, I guess they do have 3 outfielders in their top 6, but Blackmon and Arenado, wherever you can get them in. You think that makes sense? Stack the other teams and just plug in the expensive Rockies?
Yeah, that's definitely a good strategy. I also like Dahl hitting 5th, I think. His price has not really adjusted that much. He's hitting 4th, 3.5K, lefty-righty matchup. But yeah, after looking, up and down this Rockies lineup, they're definitely, I feel like, a stronger team against left-handers, especially at home. Story's WRC plus this year is 198 against lefties and 81 against righties on the season.
Bigger split than last year. Yeah, it's pretty alarming.
And then a 488 WOBA compared to a 314 WOBA. So, Blackmon, Dahl, and Arenado are definitely the strongest targets up and down this Rockies lineup. Tony Walters is a good way to, save that catcher because there isn't really any outstanding catcher plays. On the slate, and a 2.7 guy in Coors and the lefty-righty is, a pretty strong way to save some salary at catcher too.
Yeah, but I guess the weather in Chicago might make the conditions almost, if not more favorable than what Coors Field is. Coors Field, obviously a really strong hitter's park. It's not that warm yet there. It's still in the 50s or so. And I'm just checking again. Do we have lineups for Giants and Nationals? No. Still no lineups. But with the wind blowing out in Chicago, it becomes a very strong hitter's park. And Seattle, it's blowing out to right field, and Seattle has left-handed batters. For those guys especially, it's a really big boost, and I'm looking mostly at Cano and Seager. So that's going to leave LeMahieu and Arenado off a lot of lineups for me. I think Charlie Blackmon is the one to really target. David Dahl's fine to me, but he's just not that good. Like his numbers in 2016, his only real season, his only MLB experience, his offensive stats were really heavily inflated by batting average on balls in play, which was over 400. So I think Dahl's fine, but I'd still just rather use the Mariners outfielders like D. Gordon and Nelson Cruz, who are only a little more expensive, and Mitch Haniger because they're all just better hitters. But I'll have Dahl in some lineups too. There's a couple other offenses to talk about. I guess we don't really need to say anything about the Nationals and Giants. No one's going to be using Bryce Harper today. I think in non-Samardzija lineups, it's worth plugging him in, assuming he's starting because we don't have these lineups yet. But I mean, tell me if you feel any differently. But I'm just fading the San Francisco game mostly because of the stadium there.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. I know you like the White Sox offense, so I'm assuming that's the offense you'll touch on next.
Yeah, it's the White Sox, and I do think the Astros are interesting. And I guess we should mention the Padres, but yeah, White Sox first. Felix Hernandez seems really, really awful right now. He was bad last year. His velocity's down this year. He's getting less strikeouts. He's walking more guys. The wind is blowing out to right field, and Felix isn't really a ground ball pitcher. Yohan Moncada, I think, is really good, but he's especially good from the left side of the plate, so good spot for him. I think Abreu is in a good spot, and the Mariners don't really have a first baseman to use. The Rockies don't really have a first baseman to use. So for me, it's probably between Will Myers and Abreu at first base. And if we're using John Gray, then by default, Abreu is the choice. Nicky Delmonico, 3,100, batting fourth, I think is a good play. I don't know too much about most of these hitters at the bottom of the White Sox lineup, but Omar Narvaez at catcher, I think is fine. 2,500 is really cheap for a catcher. I might even prefer him to Tony Walters because Tony Walters is just a really bad hitter. Narvaez at least draws walks. I don't know. For stacks, I think Narvaez is fine. But I think Moncada, Abreu, and Delmonico, and maybe Yolmer Sanchez, I think those are pretty strong targets. So what do you think of the White Sox?
Yeah, I do think they're usable as plugs. They're probably not. I'm not making 20 lineups in this early slate, so they're probably not a team I'll be stacking full on. But I do agree that Felix Hernandez is looking very bad, and he's definitely showing signs of regression, and old age is coming at him hard this season. So he should be someone that falls into the Cole Hamels, target against range throughout this season because his name, will still carry some name value.
Yeah, and I think the White Sox are, if you are planning on stacking them, they are cheap enough if you use the right mix of guys that you can use them with Verlander and Scherzer. So Tim Anderson, I'm kind of okay with ignoring him. I'd rather use Segura probably anyway. I'd rather use Correa, but there are enough cheap guys in the White Sox lineup that you could stack them with the two most expensive pitchers if you want to go that route. I probably won't, but they'll be in lineups where I use Scherzer with Gray or Samardzija. I think that's generally what I'm thinking on them. So the Astros are at home against Tropiano. The roof is open, so a little stronger hitting environment. I don't think Tropiano is very good, and I don't think too many people are going to use the Houston offense. The problem for me is their pricing. It's just so much more than Seattle, and it's really hard to justify using them instead of Seattle. The ownership shouldn't be too much of an issue here because I think most people use the Coors game. So I think what it's going to end up being is just getting the Astros in there as plugs. If you're making 20 lineups, I think it's worth stacking them in one or two. But this is just such a good spot for the Mariners that, I think the Mariners should score more runs than the Astros today, and the prices are so much lower. So on an ordinary slate, I think I would like the Astros, but there are just better choices. So what do you think of them?
I think the Astros are a good way to, as a good ownership play on a 4-game slate. Like you said, their ownership will definitely be down with the Rockies and the Mariners offense. They are expensive, but, if you're choosing to, stay in the mid-range of pitcher, like we said earlier on the podcast, the show with Gray and Samardzija, I think throwing in a couple Astro stacks with around some Rocky stacks could be a good way to, create some leverage as they are, one of the best offenses in the league. It is a small slate, and their ownership will be down against a pitcher who's decent but not good. And, with the dome open, the ball could be flying around too as well.
Yeah, it's just, again, the Mariners are in such a good spot that I'm probably going to make almost all Mariners stacks. Shields, he's walking more guys than he's striking out this year. He is okay against right-handed batters, but those Mariners lefties are in such a strong spot. And Shields is still really bad against righties. He's just a little bit less bad. The last offense to talk about is the Padres, and it's John Gray, and he's a good pitcher, but it is Coors Field also. So I have some interest in the cheaper Padres. Carlos Asuaje batting second at 3,300. I think Chase Headley at 3,100. He was first base eligible for some amount of time, but he's not anymore. So that's going to make it hard to use Chase Headley. But I think Will Myers, because of his position at first base and outfield, you can use him. The Padres are just kind of okay to me today. It would be nice if they were a little cheaper. So I'm kind of just looking at the cheaper guys and Will Myers. That, I don't know, does that sort of align with you, or are you looking to stack the Padres at all?
No, I'm not. I would be interested in stacking the Padres if they did have Hosmer or Christian Villanueva, although he's not, an amazing hitter, but he definitely helps bolster their lineup. So, like you said, Asuaje, Headley, Will Myers, I think they're good plays. I don't have really much interest in Cordero, Corella, or the bottom of the lineup. But yeah, that about does it. We covered all the offenses. Let me check one last time to see if either of these teams.
Yeah, I just refreshed it again on that Giants game. Still nothing. So my pitching exposure, I think, without knowing what's going on in San Francisco with the hitters, I think it's going to be a 2/3, 2/3, 2/3 split between Scherzer, Gray, and Samardzija, stacking the Rockies a little bit, or just making more expensive Mariners stacks in the Gray Samardzija lineups. And then in the Scherzer lineups, I think you can stack the White Sox in a couple. You can stack the Mariners and just not use expensive plugs there. But the more I look at it, I don't want to use too much of Max Scherzer because he is a little pricey. And I think Samardzija and Gray are better plays. But because of how cheap the Mariners are, it does make sense to have Scherzer because some of these lineups are just going to have so much salary on the table. And Scherzer is the top 5 pitcher in baseball. He has an easy matchup in a good park. So I do think I'll end up with a lot of Scherzer, probably a similar amount to Gray and to Samardzija.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with you. My interests relatively aligned, but barring these late lineups, if anything changes, take a visit to our site, RotoPros.com. We have an all-access chat room where you guys can find out information up to the second that we lock, just in case anything changes, breaking news happens. But yeah, that'll about do it for this podcast and this show. Please, subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our site. We will be back on at 3:30 this afternoon. Matt and Greg will be breaking down the main slate. Thanks, guys.